Bone, picture a plain scattered with it. Bleached white, picked clean, mile after mile where a living city once stood. Not the bones of cattle. The oldest text describes something the mind refuses to hold. A generation of giants so vast in their hunger that they devoured the world that made them. And when the world had nothing left to give, they turned and began to feed on each other. This was not war. War has a purpose, a prize, an end. What the ancient record describes has no flaw beneath it at all. It is an appetite, and the story of that appetite is the most disturbing sequence in the entire pre-flood world. The Book of Genesis names them in a single haunted line. There were giants in the earth in those days, mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4, Nephilim, renowned, celebrated, the heroes of a vanished age, the kings whose names the world repeated like a prayer. But the world did not always run from them. At first, a being that size was a wall against every lesser threat, a living fortress, a god you could see kneel before. The oldest peoples built their first songs around them, carved their first idols in their shape, counted it an honor to stand in a giant's shadow. That is how renown is made, not by love, but by fear dressed up as worship. And the terrible thing about a thing you have taught yourself to worship is how long you go on feeding it after it has begun to feed on you. These were not simply large men. They were the offspring of the Watchers, the angels who left their proper place and took mortal women as wives. Their children were born of two worlds and belonged to neither. The spirit of a fallen angel poured into a body of earth and blood. And in that mismatch was the seed of everything that followed. A spirit cannot be filled by bread. A body cannot hold a spirit's hunger. What walked the earth in those days was a craving with no possible end, wearing the shape of a man and the scale of a mountain. How large? The oldest manuscripts put their height at 3,000 cubits. Whether you take that as a literal measure or as the memory of something the writers simply had no scale for, sit with what it claims. A single towering male figure, beside whom the tallest tower humanity has ever raised, would not reach the knee. What the imagination should draw is not a big man. It is a moving landscape with a will inside it, and an emptiness. A creature like that does not steal a loaf of bread. It empties a region. The Book of Enoch tells what came next, not as a description, but as a sequence, and the sequence is the horror. It does not call the giants cruel and move on. It counts, stage by stage. It counts exactly how a generation consumes a planet. It begins with bread. Enoch 7:3 describes giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men. The grain, the herds, the harvest, the labor of every field under their shadow. Consider the arithmetic of feeding even one of them. An entire season's wheat from an entire valley, gone in days. Whole flocks driven up the mountain and never seen again. The men of the lowlands working dawn to dark, not to feed their own children, but to feed the things on the ridge. And still, it is never, ever enough. Imagine waking in one of those settlements. The granaries stand open and bare. The hillsides that held your flocks are silent. You are not a subject of their kingdom. You are not even a slave, because a slave is kept alive to work again. You are something the world had no word for yet. Livestock that prays, and then the harvest ran out. Enoch 7:4 records the line the gentler retellings skip past. When men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them in order to devour them. When the bread was gone, the bakers became the bread. The texts do not linger on the act, and neither will we. The dread is not in the detail, but in the silence afterward. Picture a road at first light, empty, a door left standing open, a child's sandal alone in the dust, and the ground beneath it dark and wet where it should be pale, because something had begun that the earth had never before been asked to hold. The blood of the innocent soaking down into the soil, with no one left alive to bury the dead. There is an older verse that rings underneath this one. When the very first murder was done, Scripture says the victim's blood crieth unto me from the ground. Genesis 4:10. One death, one voice rising out of the soil. Now take that single voice and multiply it by a generation, and understand this did not fall in a single night. There was no one invasion to flee, no border to run for. It came as an attrition, a slow tightening across generations, each one born into a world a little emptier than the last. Children grew up who had never seen a granary full to the rafters, who had never heard the old number of names called at a feast. The elders remembered a louder world and could not explain to the young what had been lost. The horror was not a single catastrophe, it was a normal that kept getting worse until there was almost nothing left to lose. And here is the part the texts leave you to feel for yourself. What does it do to a people to watch the world thin out around them year after year, to learn the quiet of emptied fields and shuttered houses as simply the way things are now? The last generations before the flood did not live in terror every waking hour. Terror cannot be carried that long. They lived in something worse. They adapted. They grew quiet and small and careful. They buried their dead by night. They taught their children to keep to the low places, to move along the valley floors, and never, ever to look up at the ridge. But a hunger with no floor does not stop at men. Enoch 7:5 widens the ruin. The giants began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. Everything that walked, everything that flew, everything that swam beneath the rivers. Picture a forest with no birdsong in it. A river with no silver moving under the surface. A plain where nothing grazes and nothing hunts because the hunted and the hunters are equally gone. This is the stage the imagination resists because it is so complete. They did not conquer the living world. They unmade it, hollowed it out from the inside until the silence ran unbroken from the mountains down to the sea. And here the account reaches a stage that almost no retelling will follow it to. Because when the fields were bare and the people were gone and the last animal had fallen, the giants were still hungry. And the only thing left in all the world, large enough to feed a giant, was another giant. The Book of Jubilees records the final descent without flinching. It tells how the giants began to slay one another, how they consumed one another's flesh and drank the blood. Jubilees 7:22, the mighty men of renown, the heroes whose names the world had once chanted in the streets, ended as the last predators in a world they themselves had emptied, turning their hunger at last on the only prey that remained, their own kind. Stand back and look at the shape the texts have drawn because it is deliberate. First, they consumed the work of men. Then they consumed men. Then they consumed the world. Then they consumed each other. Not a war, not a tragic fall. A descent rung by rung into an appetite that finally turned and devoured itself. And it is here, at the very bottom of that descent, that the oldest texts do something extraordinary. They stop describing the giants altogether, and they turn, instead, to the ground. Enoch 7:6. One sentence and the hinge on which the whole story swings, and then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Sit with what that means. Not the survivors brought the accusation. There were almost none left to speak. Not the angels, not yet. The earth, the land itself. The same soil that had drunk the blood of the innocent and the beasts and the giants alike, that ground became a witness. It had absorbed every drop. It had taken in every body the giants did not finish. And now, saturated with a guilt it had never chosen to carry, the earth itself lifted up a voice toward heaven. Picture the whole of it from above, a world under a red and bruised sky. The cities fallen, the fields gone black, the rivers standing still. A planet emptied of the renowned and the ruined alike. And out of that vast silence, rising, not the scream of the dying, because the dying were already done, but something far deeper and stranger, the cry of the earth itself, a whole world opening its mouth toward the throne of God and speaking a single word. Enough. We tell this as ancient history, a horror sealed safely on the far side of a flood. But hear what it is actually about. An appetite that recognized no limit, that consumed its workers, then its neighbors, then its world, then itself, and called itself renowned the whole way down. Every age since has known that same hunger in smaller shapes. The texts are not warning you about giants. They are showing you what any creature becomes when nothing is sacred and nothing is ever enough. And they leave us with the strangest mercy in all of Scripture, that the ground beneath the innocent is not silent. that blood spilled in the dark does not simply vanish into it, that a world can fall so far that the very dirt cries out, and that the cry, impossibly, is heard. If you want to follow that cry all the way up, to learn who heard it and what they finally did, then stay with us. Subscribe to History Remembered and keep walking back into the oldest and darkest chapters of the human story. Because the deeper you dig, the clearer one truth becomes. The old powers were never truly destroyed, only buried. And buried things, as this generation learned too late, do not always stay quiet. But the cry of the earth did not fade into an empty sky. The accusation of a ruined world rose past the clouds, past the stars, into the highest heaven. And there, at last, 4 figures heard it: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, the 4 great archangels standing before the throne, looking down for the first time on everything the Watchers had made. The earth had spoken. Now heaven would answer, and that is where we go next.